Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. My name is Ariane Rice. I am an ordained Episcopal priest and leadership coach, and I host conversations with professionals in the church and outside the church to talk about leadership, spirituality, and how we live into who we are becoming in our work and in the world. I am thrilled and delighted that you are here. So let's get started. Do you know what it's like to want a job or a title with everything you have? And so you move forward with your choices. You create a path, knowing that it might take some time, but inevitably you will get what you want. And you do. You achieve your goal. But then after the celebration, after the joy of getting what you wanted, well, then all of a sudden you wake up one day and think, wait a minute, is this it? Is this really what I was going for? Is this really what I thought I'd be getting into? I am sure you do know that experience, my friend, which of course is why I'm asking the question. I don't think that experience is all that unique. And I don't know how many parish priests are listening, but that is definitely a feeling I've had in this line of work. Today, I am talking with my friend and colleague, the Reverend Stephanie Allen. And whether or not you are a priest, I believe her description of the ordained leader in a community, a description I don't think I really understood until I did it for a while, well, it's not that much different than what a leader is called to do in any community. Because it takes work, introspection, and then I think some more work to really grow into self-differentiated leadership. And in listening back to this conversation, I was once again reminded of Eugene Peterson's words. I've been reminded of his words with two other conversations with female parish priests, Erica von Haren and Glenna Huber from last season, by the way. Anyway, I was reminded again of Peterson's book, The Pastor, a Memoir, and I quote, "The pervasive element in our 2,000-year pastoral tradition is not someone who gets things done, but rather the person placed in the community to pay attention and call attention to what is going on right now between one another and with God. It is primarily local, relentlessly personal, and prayerful without ceasing." End quote. Priests and pastors are certainly not the only ones who desire to cultivate that ability to attentively listen in their contexts. All right. So, thanks for being here, and let's get started with today's conversation. Hey, Stephanie Allen. I am so excited that you are taking time to talk with me. It's been, 20 years since we've seen each other.
It feels that way. Like they're in their 30s now.
I know. And as we were just saying, it's 20 years ago, and it feels like it's also like 2 minutes ago.
Right.
That's crazy how time works.
Yes.
So why don't you say a little bit about who you are, what you're called to do in this world, and how you presently do it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for asking me to do this. I'm really delighted to talk to you and to see your face too. So I am a priest in North Carolina. I serve at the Church of the Nativity in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have been there for 12 years, which is really hard to believe. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Again, the time, it feels like I just got there a few years ago. And so the fact that it is 12, it'll be 13 in April, feels really strange to me in so many ways. And so that's what I do. I'm a parish priest. I've always felt called to be a parish priest since I started sensing this call. But I think what I am noticing about vocation and what I'm called to do right now and in the time that we live in right now is the idea of what it means to be a parish priest has changed a lot since we went to seminary, and which really wasn't that long ago, only been 15 years. So it doesn't seem like it should have changed that much. But I do think in so many ways, and a lot of this is probably because of COVID speeding up things that were happening in the church, is that I feel like the parish priest now is a role of really listening to the Spirit, asking, where is this current congregation in this current moment being led? What work is it being led to do right now? And let's honor and celebrate what was in the past, but let's leave it in the past. And let's not get real hung up on what the future is going to look like. And let's live in this present moment of asking, who are our people that we need to serve? Where is God calling us to be right now? And that's, I think, quiet work, and it's slow work. And so I feel like the role of the parish priest now too is to be the person that can stand in the middle of the constant flow that's always going and need to respond and need for crisis and immediacy to say, let's take a deep breath and let's see what it is that God wants from us.
So, because I love talking about listening and slow work and that deep, still, small voice. So I'm curious, if we go back in time, what was the still, small voice of Stephanie in the beginning, before there was a note? I mean, was it saying like, I am called to be a parish priest, or was there something calling about your faith, about God, about what was calling?
I think initially the still voice was calling me to be with people in some way, and or calling upon or drawing upon a desire to help people meet God.
Where do you think that came from?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm an extrovert. I really like people. I get a lot of energy from being around people. And I was very fortunate to grow up in the Episcopal Church and to grow up in a very loving and welcoming church that was really it was small, but it was quite odd. It was a very high Anglo-Catholic church that would also have folk masses with banjos and guitars. Like Western North Carolina, man, we do things different. It's weird. So when people get hung up on it's got to be a certain style, it's got to be a certain way. Why? So I think maybe growing up in this and really being formed by the Book of Common Prayer and the prayers that are about listening and about waiting for God and about remembering like that God is the one who's got this really along for the ride. So I think that's been a big part of it for me. And I feel like when I engage with people, I learn so much about myself and about them and about God. And so I feel like the kind of natural progression of my call since that moment I said, I think I'm called to do this, has been really living into that curiosity and having to reframe it that, I was a good Southern girl who was raised to not be nosy, right? It's okay to be curious. Curious is different than nosy, right?
New Yorkers are just raised to be cynical, and we have to switch it to curiosity. Instead of our innate cynicism, or at least that was my New York upbringing.
There you go. So I think it really started. I think that's probably where it started, and then I think seeing that in action of often, and I think this is the benefit of being in a place for 12 years, is you realize that sometimes the best action is inaction. Not everything needs a response. That some things do play themselves out. And
how long did it take you to figure that out?
Probably the first 5 years.
Yes. Okay. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, probably the first 5 years. And I think really realizing that, you have to go in and do this and best. And, I feel like we got a lot of that in seminary in our training, that you know better than everybody. And meet these people who've had, years and years and years of a spiritual life and been engaged in their community in really meaningful ways. And that's certainly not true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better for everyone if we can listen and collaborate together and ask, well, what's the wisdom in the room?
What's a story, if you think for a second? Because what I'm hearing a little bit is resonating with the first 5 years and feeling a pressure that I'm supposed to kind of prove why I've been called to be rector, why I've been called to be the leader. So I'm going to prove to you. And I'm usually going to prove it by reacting and responding immediately to try and solve everything, and usually fix with a very fixed mentality. Because the first people that meet you at the train station are telling you everything that can be broken, that is broken. And then learning to get to a place of comfort with yourself to take things in and not feel that compulsion to respond. Can you think of a time or experience that was part of what led you to learn that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I'm not sure that there's one single story or one single place I could really point to. I really think it is it's the daily living, and it's the ebb and flow of every year, and it's noticing when you're there for a long time, it's noticing the patterns that keep coming up. What I started to realize was, oh, this particular issue is going to pop up, or we can kind of say, oh, well, this is just generally how the fall works, or, oh, well, this generally happens in the spring, or this is the ebb and flow of life and ministry. I think, too, I'm fortunate to be in a congregation that doesn't hold real tightly to things. So if it felt like a ministry had come to its natural conclusion, or there just wasn't energy for something anymore, they've been really great about saying, yeah, we don't need to do this anymore. Let's say goodbye and let's call it an end, and let's see what the next new thing is. And that jibes really well with my personality too, to start things. But then once they get kind of monotonous, I'm like, yeah, I'm not so interested anymore, which again is surprising to me that I've been there for 12 years, because there's a lot of the sameness in parish ministry.
Yeah, we both had the same. I think we both had Canon Constance Coles of blessed memory, was the one who sort of shepherded our process in New York. And I remember her saying to me, Ariane, I'm worried you're going to get really bored, because church is the same Sundays, same fall, same stewardship, same Christmas, same Epiphany, same Lent. Yeah. And you just go through it again and again, frequently, because it's a both and. Yes, it's boring, and it's never boring.
Right. And for me, I think spiritually, there's something about the faithfulness of just showing up every day, even when it's boring. There's not much going on, even when you're in a lull period of, well, we're not sure where this is going next, or we're not sure what's happening. I think it's like saying the daily office every day, right?
Yeah.
After a while, it's kind of boring. You've read, you've done the lectionary a couple of times. You're like, oh gosh, this again. You keep showing up. And although sometimes even that, though, you do it in a different way, right? You start listening to a podcast at the daily office rather than reading it, or you get people to do it with you. Like, even within that, the dailiness and the faithfulness of keep showing up does have to change. Like, it can't always be the same thing, because I think that leads to just stagnation. But then I think in terms of our churches, of congregations, of parish life, I think right now nothing is the same because of COVID, and we want it to be the same. I think there's a deep desire in congregations for it to go back, but it's not. And so it's almost the opposite of the stagnation of this kind of living in the abyss of questions, of not sure where's the foundation going to be, where's the firmness that we can step on and trust. And I think that creates a lot of anxiety. And I think that's what congregations are going through in different ways.
Yeah, I think there's both anxiety, and then when people get a little curious and they show up, they're like, oh, wait, this isn't what we thought it would be. I pulled out, I don't know if you had ever read Phyllis Trickle, The Great Emergence. This was published in 2008, and at the time, she spoke about, we are not dealing with the online world. We are not dealing with the, continuous precipitous decline. And now in 2023, so much, including the footnote that I reread 50 times, which said, the one thing that is true of big shifts in history is they are typically accompanied, they have always been accompanied by a pandemic.
Wow.
And at the time, she connected it with AIDS and spoke to that as being a pandemic. And yes, it was. And then there was COVID. And that really has shifted, so much.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why, even though staying with one congregation, there's still a lot of change.
There is. Absolutely. And I think that is another reason why that the faithfulness of just keep showing up is probably what our culture needs, because it's not just in the institution of the church. It's every institution. It's our political institutions. It's our schools. Like it's everything that we've kind of counted on are going through this tremendous shift, and we're in the middle of it. So we don't know where it's going, and we don't know what's going to happen. As much as we talk about preparing for the future, I really think that the faith, I keep coming back to this word faith, the faithful response is to live in the present moment and just say, well, what are we supposed to be doing now?
So I'm kind of curious to ask you, what's like the good news for you about faith that matters regardless of doctrine and dogma and all the things that people get hung up and argue about?
Well, I think the good news is that God tends to meet people wherever they are, regardless of what's going on in the wider world. And that's the stories of Scripture. It's really God encountering people wherever they are, and they're usually not in a place that they're living their best life. And then God usually asks them to do something extraordinary that they don't want to do. I guess it's an interesting thing. I think boundaries are good. And I think that our doctrine and our history and these things, especially as Episcopalians, give us those boundaries. But also boundaries are most alive and healthy when they're permeable and flexible, and they allow for the changes that might be necessary, as long as they're in line with our values. If we're very clear about what our values are, and those boundaries still work within those values, I think that those things are helpful because they tell us who we are and what we're about. But then when we come across new information, or there is something that is still in alignment with our values, that might mean our boundaries have to shift a little bit. I think if we're clear about what those values are, we can do that. And we can allow those doctrines that maybe we thought were really important, maybe they're not as important as we thought. Or maybe they need to shift in some ways.
Can you, well, I'm curious because I'm always going to try and point certain answers back to lived experience and stories of those lived experiences. So when was a time in the congregation or outside the congregation, with a collar on or without a collar on, when you kind of became more aware of that because you lived through something that taught it to you?
I think it's just been more of an internal shift for me. I myself used to get really hung up on what will other priests think about me in terms of how I do liturgy, or how, do I affirm enough doctrine, or am I saying the right thing? How many heresies did I commit in my sermons? But then when I talk to my people and what they're experiencing in their daily lives, and what they're feeling, and what they struggle with, and where they're suffering, is I realize that really doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really doesn't matter. That what people need to hear is the grace of God who loved them, who did die on the cross for them. Like I find myself in some ways getting more explicit about salvation through the cross for my people, right? Because they need to hear it, and they need to hear it in ways that it's about grace, because many of them came from traditions or grew up, or just the general culture, especially down here in the South, that it's so much about punishment and fear or else, that I think to hear that message of grace and of love through that lens there's like a re-education,
Yeah.
And so in some, but I also want to be really clear that that's for the people who come to my church, right? And that there
Right.
must be something about my church and my traditions that drew them there. And I'm not asking them to buy into all of it, but if they're at least curious enough to come and listen and have that resonate, there's something to that. And I think also within that message of grace is that message of, if this doesn't work for other people, they're on their own path. And that's between them and God. So I don't think I need to water down our identity of who we are as Christians and as Episcopalians to the detriment of, well, anybody can come. Right?
It does. It does. And then I kind of want to know, so when did you experience that grace that you're talking about?
I mean, I look at my life and I'm just really astounded by all the goodness that is there. And, I'm a pretty terrible person, Ariane. You've known me.
I would disagree.
It's a lot of time.
Well, us strong women, heaven
Right?
forbid sometimes we're just strong and clear and tell people what we need and want.
So I really do think that it is God's grace that gets me through this. If God's grace is enough and is sufficient and God loves me that much, then I kind of got to love myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if I love myself and I don't judge myself, then that makes me a whole lot more compassionate with the world.
Somebody said in a sermon that I heard, a bishop sat down a bunch of people about to be ordained and told them, the reason you're called to ministry is because God needs to work on you more than most people. Which resonated really with me. I was like, oh, that definitely makes sense. And sometimes I say to my people, which even when I say the word my people, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're not mine. But anyway, the people I get to serve with, I'll say something like, I wish you could do sermons like I do, because preparing a sermon is such a valuable exercise. There's so much to learn. I'll never be able to learn it all. I'm never bored. I don't know. Can you say a little bit about, for you, the process of digging deep into a sacred text, how that informs who you are?
Well, that's what I love about preaching, the familiarity of it. That actually, for me, the familiarity of doing it every 3 years and having done several cycles now, and you do see something new every time. And it does, I think it's allowed me to go deeper each time. And so for me, I think the question that I'm always asking is, so what? So I'm reading this and it might be an interesting story. There might be compelling scholarship about it, but really the end of the day is, well, so what? Mm-hmm. So what does this mean to me spiritually? And what is it going to mean to, I call them my people too, because they are my people. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like God has gifted me these people that I get to be with and have these conversations with them in this way, because to me, it is a conversation and it is a way for me to kind of open up the stuff that's always going on in my brain. Because I think about things all the time. Like, it never shuts up. Mm-hmm. And so I get to kind of open up my brain and invite them in to say, here's what I'm wrestling with. What do you think? Mm-hmm. Where is this meeting you? And they're really gracious and generous people. And so they listen, and sometimes they hear different things than I do. And then that's kind of cool. And sometimes that really resonates with them. And so for me, it's really that, again, it's what's the present moment in time that I'm wrestling with right now, where the scripture is meeting me. And also that I'm tuned in enough with my community to know that they're wrestling with this too.
I was thinking before we got on the call, because we hadn't seen each other in so long, but I was like, I feel like Stephanie and I both really love the preaching aspect of parish ministry. And like you, I think I do think of it as a conversation and feel really grateful that people actually show up to listen to me.
Yes.
Because I'm like, wow, that's really kind. What if this is bad? And one of the huge changes over time, I think seminary stressed us out to no end. Part of it, it's like, that can't be helped. You're learning a whole new thing and you're embarking on this whole identity. So it can't be helped. but I mean, agonized over every word in seminary. I emailed you years ago because I wanted permission to utilize one of your metaphors that I had heard in your senior sermon, because senior sermons made such an impression because we were all terrified and it was like our master class of preaching. Ugh, it gives me the chills.
It's also performative too.
That's one thing about parish ministry and kind of like integrating with the call. You hopefully, I mean, sure, there's still performative aspects, but hopefully you simply want to become a person who's a more fuller Christian person in a community of people who are all seeking the same.
Yeah, I think that's been there a long time too.
Yeah.
I think if you can't move past that performative aspect of it, you're probably going to change jobs every 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Because once you get past that performative, everybody's on their best behavior, and you start moving into the realness, can you be comfortable enough to let people see your realness?
I really think in some ways the job has created me as much as I've grown better, more in doing the job. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Well, me neither, until it came out of my mouth. That's what you said.
Because I do wonder, like, the things that, like if it is, I mean, God does see the wholeness of us. And so anything, whether it's priesthood or therapy or coaching or anything that we feel called to do, whether it's for paid work or not, anything that I think draws on the kind of, I don't want to say the shadow side, but maybe not our strengths of us that maybe need a little bit more attention to, that we don't go to because they're not our strengths. And maybe that's what God does with those things.
So I'm curious to hear, in your life right now, what's something that's happening where you're like, wow, I can't believe all this is happening. This is amazing. This is why I love doing what I do.
So we're starting a group that's going to meet weekly, but it's going to be a support group for LGBTQIA plus young people ages 12 to 15 for simply support, and another group that'll meet concurrently for their parents. And I'm just really excited to see this happen.
Can you say a little bit about how it came to happen?
So it really did come from some deep listening and from a couple people hearing the same thing. And so it was in the course of my sabbatical, watching all the, seeing all the news about just young people in general, mm-hmm. and everything they're struggling with, and the suicide rates and the depression rates and anxiety. Mm-hmm. I've certainly seen it in young people at church and my own kids and their friends, and just how much they're struggling. And then just the constant onslaught of what's going on politically with our queer brothers and sisters, that I'm just like, and that so much of it is driven by people who call themselves Christian, which
I know
is just so disgusting to me. So feeling like we need to do something. We need to, and also just, the kind of our own, children's programming and youth programming at church of just this, it doesn't seem to be working.
Yep. I hear that.
And the deep desire and anxiety for it, but there's just so many other things.
Commitments, yeah.
And I feel that. I felt that I feel that as a parent myself. There's always something else that's and it's hard. So feeling like, well, what if it were just something for, and then coming back, and 2 of my staff members, so the person who's now our associate for Christian formation, and then our new associate rector, who's also a therapist, and they had similar. They'd even had a meeting and like had a conversation about it while I was gone on sabbatical. Like we need to do some kind of support. What do we do? And then as the 3 of us, oh, you were thinking about that? I was thinking about that. And as we started meeting about once every couple of weeks and just talking and praying and listening, and all 3 of us really kind of coming to that sense of this really does need to be for queer young people. Mm-hmm. We can't do it all, and we can't do everything. So we do need to focus this. This is a need. Also kind of our location where we are. There's places and support downtown, which is north of us in downtown Raleigh. It's a good 20 minutes away. And there's stuff in Durham, which, is about 25 minutes away.
Yeah.
So we're in this suburban area where there's just not a lot to address the needs. So we started thinking, and we have space. We have this great education building that doesn't get used as much as it could be. We've got plenty of space, and talking about, well, how would we do this? What would it look like? And then bringing more people into the conversation, and just generally kind of having it. We talked about, do we try and get like therapists to come, or interns, or do it that way? And then it's kind of settled out to be more of a, no, we're going to facilitate it ourselves. It's going to be more of a support getting together. We'll have training. There won't be, it's not going to be just, oh yeah, whoever shows up. And then also like talking to the LGBTQ Center and Raleigh and hearing from those folks that young people like to do things with their parents more than they did before. And it seems to be a post-COVID thing. They're more inclined and feel safer if they can bring their parents. And then in talking, we had a gathering after church, just throwing it out there, like, we're thinking about this, anybody who's interested. And I thought we'd have, 2 or 3, our kind of usual 4 or 5 people. So we had close to 20 people in the room. We're like, this is necessary. We need to do this. It's wrong what is going on, and we need this to happen. And from that group really came the older kind of teens usually have their own stuff. They can drive. It's usually that middle school age that needs, and that's when you're starting to kind of figure yourself out, and you don't know who else is out there. And also for parents, also like how are they navigating what might be a change, and like, oh, I thought my kid was this, but now they're telling me there's this grief that can go along with that, and that kind of adjusting to what that is, and which I think is part of having a middle school age kid anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds amazing, but the thing that also strikes me about it is I want to highlight like the organic way in which it was formed, and also the way in which it's not like, oh, everything has to be like completely perfect before we just start. It's like, no, just start, and then things will happen and things will develop and something will get created. And I do think, again, with the community that comes together and gathers regularly and shows up out of some sense of obligation, honestly, like that those things can happen, because you all know you're going to be there. You're going to still be in relationship no matter what. And you doesn't need to just be performative. You're just trying to address a need in a way how, and we'll see what happens.
So if people show up, we'll see what they want.
Yep, exactly.
Young people want. Do they just want to hang out? If they just want to hang out and be together, we can do that. If they want to change it up, again, that kind of, we're creating the space. We're creating the space for anybody who wants to take advantage of it, which I think that's probably my philosophy of church these days.
Yeah.
Right? You asked me earlier, what does it mean to be a priest right now? I think that's what it means. I think it means we create the space, and people can come and make of it what's in their hearts, what they want, what they need. Well, I love that. And that is a perfect way to completely, beautifully conclude this episode of Feeling Beings Who Think. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for making time. And I wish you well in everything, and hope that our paths cross again in the church. Thank you for inviting me. It's been delightful.